So I run the early stage technology group in Boston for Silicon Valley Bank, and as part of that, get to work with lots and lots of cool companies and have lots of great founders and investors that are part of our network. And one of those is Chase. So really thrilled to have him in today to talk about the company that he started 4 or 5 years ago, or less. 4 years ago.
Yep.
And how he built it, ultimately how he sold it, why he sold it when he did, all of those kinds of things. And I think one of the great things about Chase's story is it's a media company. We are in a town that is full of obviously tech companies, life science companies. I wouldn't say that we're in a town that's necessarily known for building a lot of big media brands. And I don't know, maybe yours isn't big yet, but it's getting bigger all the time, right?
Yeah, getting bigger.
So so that's part of what we're going to try to touch on here today too. So, but maybe to start with, just can you tell us how you got here? I mean, how did you end up starting? Why did you end up starting Streetwise Media, which we all probably know better as BostInno here locally? But how did you get there?
I went to a small school in New York, Hamilton College. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but while I was there, I started the first digital media company with a guy that is still my co-founder at Streetwise. And it was an online college publication that we started rather than applying for internships and things like that, just because it seemed like a better idea. It was like the blind leading the blind. We really had no idea what we were doing, but it was fun, and it was kind of our first foray into, digital media. And I'm from the Massachusetts area, so when we graduated, I came back here. We continued to work on it, and we had gotten bit by the entrepreneurship bug. We liked digital media. We liked the space. So while the college space ultimately wasn't what we wanted to do, we had made pretty good pizza and beer money on it. It was back in the days of we sold ads through a platform called Allred, which now there's all sorts of programmatic buying and sophisticated ways of doing it, but we basically sold a link for $1,000 a week on our site, which for college kids was huge. So that's kind of how we had kicked it off. And
who bought that? Who were the advertisers?
There were some just sketchy affiliate marketing types on Allred, and then some laundry services. We had 250 student writers at 100 different schools across the country, West Coast, East Coast, all over. So it was a real big operational mess because it was run by 2 college kids that weren't particularly organized, but we learned a lot. So when we left...
How much time were you guys working on that, when you were in school?
I didn't go to class often. I tried to drop out multiple times, and my parents were psyched about that. So I did enough to get by, and oddly, my grades senior year were the best. I don't know how that worked, but...
and those 250 people, they just add content for free, or they get paid something?
Well, at first, yeah, they did it for free. At first, they didn't know that we were college students. We said this was like the New York Times of college publication. It's like you need to build a resume and a portfolio. We're very selective about who publishes. Congratulations, you got published the first try. And it just kind of spread. And one of the funniest things...
This is being recorded, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. Well, our managing editor of BostInno now was one of our sports editors back then. And so he came in to interview one time, and I was like, "Do you remember me?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, I remember you." And I was like, "Yeah, so a few things about that operation." He's like, I know. So it came full circle. And he went on to Medill graduate school. He's top pedigree, so I'm lucky that he's back with us. But
you guys had an editor who kind of looked for the news?
We actually had 12. We had a bunch of people that eventually were kind of brought into the fold, and we had people in different parts of the country. We even had them by vertical, so we had probably our most successful was, and this was part of the reason we didn't succeed. I think our best editor was a fashion editor, which, as you can tell, I'm not a very fashionable dude. And she went to Milan and covered Fashion Week. I mean, she did some really great work, which she probably should have been doing for like Vogue and not our publication. So we didn't have a lot of direction or focus, which was part of the issue. And we weren't necessarily a publication for college students. We were like half that, which if you're going to try and target college students, it should be sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And we were kind of like, also a window into college life for an older demo. So our focus wasn't good, which was kind of our downfall. But it was good enough for kind of a first go around. And anything that we made off of it was, we were psyched about. So we had no idea how to scale a business. Although I'll probably say that about myself now too in 5 years. So, but we did that, and we kind of, as we graduated and moved on, it became an afterthought because we didn't have a lot of interest in the college life scene, and we came up with this concept of we didn't like Google Reader, and being in news we were always reading things and needed to stay on top of a bunch of different sources. And we built my co-founder is a very smart guy. I took a lot of computer science in high school. But I'm a little bit dyslexic, so that doesn't make for writing good code. And he was a chem major, and he's got photographic memory. And I just started telling him, you should learn some PHP, these things. He's the type of guy that picked it up in 6 weeks and was doing all of our technical work. And he worked with a group of developers in Vietnam, actually, Hanoi, at Hanoi Institute of Technology. And what we developed was this site called Pinata. Pinyadda, and it was like a social news reader. And we built this crawling technology that had some very basic semantic technology. So we could tag, we could basically read the text and discern, all right, this article should be tagged politics. And we could go even deeper. We could tag it Obama or Romney. And if you wanted to follow a topic, you could just get these streams of news. And the idea was you had all this content coming in, and then you pinned content to a profile. PIN stood for Personalized Information Network. And I remember when we were working on it, I got an email from a guy saying, do you have a trademark on Pin It? I said, no, legality, whatever. He started Pinterest. No joke. And rather than doing, we were like kind of serious news. He was cupcakes and puppies and all the stuff that people really care about. So they took off. So close on that concept. But we started BostInno as this harebrained scheme to ultimately drive signups for Pinata, which just didn't even remotely work because we didn't write about ourselves. Well, it'd be too promotional just to write about ourselves. So we started writing about all these tech companies. And while we were doing it, we were saying, there's got to be kind of a louder, more fun and edgy voice in tech. The coverage we felt was kind of bland. So that started taking off. Traffic was growing. Everything was growing. And Pinata had probably 10,000 users. Very deep engagement, but it just didn't have the scale that you would need for that type of consumer web play. So we started using the technology to actually curate news for BostInno and focus strictly on that. So that's how
it ended up going the other way. Instead of BostInno promoting Pinata,
we used the platform to help us as as an internal tool.
And what did the cycle look like to figure out that made more sense?
Longer than it should have, probably, knowing me. So we were, I graduated 2007, and we decided at the very end of 2009 to focus primarily on BostInno. So I started BostInno January 2009 as I have the original email. I recently went through all of our old emails because we've switched email domains a couple times. And I found the original email. There were 14 people on it. One guy that I knew worked in biotech, one in government, one in these things. I said, anybody can write for this site, taking what we learned from Campus Word. It's going to be the best of innovation in Massachusetts. And we got a few people to write. And then we made it like an aggregation site, which didn't work. And then we went back to original content, and let's go. And so 2010, at this point, we're working from 2007 through all of 2010. My co-founder and I, we had enough money to pay for our rent, and then we each had about $400 of disposable income. So I can tell you that the Stop and Shop out in Comm Ave in Alston, you can get $3 raviolis that will last you a week. The White Horse in Alston has like a $4 burger special Wednesdays at noon. Disgusting burgers, but it's cheap. So we didn't mind. Beer's cheap. That's pretty much all I needed at the time. So, eventually we kept getting traction. We got better at figuring out. We're very data-driven and measuring what headlines got more traffic, what the ROI was versus, Google referral traffic, organic versus news versus Facebook versus Twitter versus Hacker News versus Reddit and all these things. So we started to get kind of that breakaway ramping metric that you need to entice investors, and we ended up closing around in June 2011. So it really took us 4 years of a little family and friends money and then minimal revenue to get to a funding event.
So family and friends, I mean, did they kind of get what you were doing? Were they supporting just
kind of
you because you were you?
Yeah.
What was the story?
There was a lot of you because you're you. We're lucky that we have some entrepreneurial family members that stuck with us. And it wasn't really like, here's a chunk of money, spend it. It was, what's like the bare minimum this month that you can live off of. So It was like a float rather than, we never really had money to invest in the business. It was kind of, we live and, if you guys can on your own without spending any money, figure out how to create some value.
So I've told you this story before, and I feel a little uncomfortable telling it in front of this many people, but I remember being at a cocktail party at some point in 2009, and someone saying, we really need these guys from BostInno to make it. Like, it's really important that they make it. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, why is it so important? Is it just like some one more news site?
Right.
I mean, what was the big deal about what you guys were doing in your mind? And, how differentiated was it? And was it media? Was it different kind of media? Were you changing the world? I mean, how did you guys view it at the time, back in 2009?
Back in 2009, it's like the 70s, man. It's a blur. No. I don't know, really. We definitely had a little bit of, we felt that the tech community was kind of archaic. I'm a tech history nerd in that there's a great book, Creative Capital, I believe is the name of it, written about this guy George Dorio, who basically started the American Research and Development Corporation here, which was...
We have a conference room at Silicon Valley Bank named after him.
There you go. So I was a bit of a nerd in kind of how the Massachusetts area hatched what is now essentially the model for modern-day venture capital. Even prior to that, kind of the Springfield Valley out west was the center of innovation for a lot of the manufacturing models that went into the Industrial Revolution and things. So I'm a history nerd, and I've read a lot about DEC, analog devices, all the things that were hatched here, and kind of the heyday, as people like to talk about it. And we were saying, there's still a lot of awesome stuff here, and we're big believers that there's, we're totally underrated in terms of how people value what we do here. And we just, we can be loud and bang the drum, so let's start telling some stories. So I think people liked the way that we told them. It was not formal. We weren't afraid to call certain things the way it really was, which I think is sometimes lacking here. not in all media. Like, there's the political media here is ruthless, you know.
Yeah.
But we did it, I think, in a way that was, at the end of the day, everybody knew that, you know, we're homers, we're hometown. We want the community here to win.
Yeah.
But, you know, in order to do that the right way, you also gotta call some people out sometimes. So
Yeah.
I think people rallied behind that, and we also serve alcohol at all of our events, and we made them a little bit more fun. And
Right.
people liked that about it, which we totally blindly walked into.
Yeah.
We never intended on having an event business, which is now a big piece of our business. So we started throwing parties at our first office, which, Sam, did you ever come to that office at Chauncey? Down, like, it's right on the corner of Chinatown. So there was this guy in Deval Patrick's office, Jason Schupak, who was the head of creative economy, or I forget what his title was. But I just started stalking this guy, and I'm emailing him saying, you know, there are all these empty warehouses on Summer Street. You should just put our company in there and incubate startups. He's like, that's not at all what my job is, and that's not how it works. I don't own those buildings, but talk to this guy. He's trying to start an incubator. So we ended up in a spot in, I guess, downtown Crossing, where it was a company that had moved from Boston to LA, and they just had a open space. So we started inviting Court Johnson, a bunch of guys over that, you know, were trying to do similar stuff to us and starting companies. And next thing we know, there are 200 people, and the fire department showed up because an alarm went off or something. We're like, I think we should start charging for this. So that's kind of how it all came to be. But from a media standpoint, I think the thing that contributed from the model early was that we very much had the mentality that our journalists weren't just standing on the sidelines reporting about something. We said, you know, you should be a part of the community. You should, you know, learn what it's like to try and start a company and do these things. In an era when anybody can publish on their phone, on their computer, it's changed journalism to the sense of, you know, one of the things when we train every new writer that comes on board, you know, we said, you are basically facing the greatest supply side surplus in the history of any industry. There's more information on the internet now than anybody needs. So how do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah.
You really have to be a part of the community and also make the community a part of the news. Mm-hmm. The news is very participatory now. I think Huffington Post is a good example of, you know, somebody who has shown that model with their contributor network. So we were really a platform from day one, in the sense that we had Mike Troiano, Mayor Menino, Scott Brown, a lot of different people that we just, you know, it was like a sales process. We begged them to write on the site, and it kind of fed on itself. So yeah. I think people felt a bit of ownership early on that helped contribute to, you know, this is a positive thing for the community.
Yeah. I mean, and that seems, like you mentioned Huffington Post, I mean, that's something we've seen lots of different places now, but at the time it seemed like this whole channel concept was pretty revolutionary, right?
Yeah,
we let anybody say anything they want to say.
Yeah, I mean, we got out early on it. I mean, we were one of the first. We just, you know, we're not as big as some of the other guys. Naturally, being local, you know, our potential audience size is a little different. But we were very out early on both the community model, which still there are a lot of people that do it, and they don't do it well or right. Just having anybody post anything isn't why it worked. What we would do is we would do some of the hard work in terms of picking editorial themes that we knew people wanted to hear about, rather than anybody just rant about anything. And then we would target, you know, we'd talk about, you know, what kind of civic innovation do we need? And we would target people in government or people at the Kennedy School working on Gov 2.0 and things like that. We would talk about, you know, how technology is changing marketing, and we would get some people from, you know, the old world agencies, we'd get some people from HubSpot, we'd get some different people. So we had this blend, and we would kind of package these voices together, almost like a digital panel of four different perspectives. And I think that's kind of what made it more than just like a one-off, here's a guy that wants to, you know, say something or just sell something to you. And it's turned into a good commercial product for us as well. But we were out pretty early on it, and that's why, I mean, early on we actually had done a partnership with Huffington Post where we basically could distribute some of our content to their platform if it made sense. And the idea was essentially local reach for them into communities that they wouldn't ultimately have, and source more voices. And for us, it helped us bring contributors onto the platform because we could say you also have the potential to be on a bigger outlet.
Yeah. So talk about the evolution of the revenue model from the ad-bright days to where you are today.
So the channel concept we came up with early. And basically, a channel is now just native advertising on our platform, what everybody now calls native advertising. And I won't go too into the weeds, but I get very upset about the semantics of native advertising. In the publishing world, the term native advertising, everybody just means like a sponsored article, but Facebook is native advertising. Ultimately, what we consider native advertising is any ad that's proprietary and native to the platform, right? So Google has their own ad platform, Facebook has their own, Twitter has their own. If you're just putting like IAB standard display ads, then obviously that's not native. That can run on any platform. But in the traditional media sense, everybody just thinks it's a sponsored article. But we started with some standard display, which from day one we never wanted to do that because I'm not like a big display advertising hater. There's a reason that there are billions and billions of dollars in it. It can work. Retargeting just flat out works. You were on a site, you were halfway down the checkout funnel, and whatever, you don't finish that ad on another site, like it gets you back. Oh, I forgot to check out at Amazon. But I do find that for certain things, there's a better, I think, user experience than display advertising, which you don't usually get a lot of pushback from that.
Yeah, sure.
So we had said from day one, we started this site out of nowhere, and we created this audience, and ultimately marketers just want to reach an audience. So if what we did works for us between the events and content, why don't we just figure out a way to package that for the people that we're selling to? And so it took us a while to build up. I have zero background in event marketing and things like that. But we got better at it, and now it's a 50% profit margin business for us, which is great. And there's a lot that goes into it. The good thing about it is scalable. Like, you can do it in a lot of different markets, but it's very hard to. There's just a lot that goes into it. So it's kind of defensible when you get to the point where it's scalable. It's a lot of man hours. It's a lot of equipment, booking, all sorts of things. So once you get past kind of the ramp up phase, it's a pretty solid business to be in. And what we've found is it's a very differentiator. It's a big differentiator for us compared to both the two groups of competitors that we face. One is kind of the national digital players, like a Huffington Post or somebody that, in the past, now that we can IP target and doing all these things, anybody can be a local advertiser in a sense. And so we do have competition on that front. And then, of course, we compete with the traditional locals. And on a content standpoint, that can be anybody from Boston.com and the Globe to the business journals, who are now our sister sites. But on a client side, from audience, it's different. But on a client side, really anybody that wants to go after that local advertiser's dollars, whether it's radio, print, TV, technically there can be some competition there. So we have to differentiate ourselves between those two groups. And what has worked really, really well for us, and that is ramping, and what you're seeing pretty much everyone in media trying to go to, is we really don't sell products, we sell a solution. And we don't have a menu that you can pick off of. We will come up with a custom content solution and experiential solution for every one of our clients, and we really try not to push any package out the door that doesn't have both digital and experiential tied into it. So we'll go through a process where, just as we would do if we were trying to sell something, is let's design the decision-making process of your client. How do they figure out, how do they learn about your product, awareness, how do they educate themselves about why they should buy it over something else, and then ultimately, how do they purchase it? And for a lot of local people, the purchase point comes in the physical world, which is why the experiential for us is key. And that's where a big national that only has digital will never be able to compete. Yeah. And compared to the traditionals locally, one, they're not very heavy in the event business. The business journals are, but the Globe has never been very heavy in that. And from a digital standpoint, it's not their bread and butter. I always talk about, the Globe is a manufacturing business. If I had to compete on how to run a paper manufacturing plant, I'd be screwed. I have no idea how to do that. So changing from that to digital, where the distribution of an article and a link online compared to trucks and paper boys and all that stuff, it's just a fundamentally very different business that, they've transitioned in the grand scheme of things of the daily newspapers in the country very well, but it's still not, their focus cannot be. It just can't. They make 80% of their profit is from print. It can't be all on digital, so we've got an advantage there, especially on native advertising and things that we've been able to focus 100% of our efforts on. So,
and mostly focus on tech, or is it on everything, or the value?
From a content perspective?
Yeah, for a content perspective.
We were, and we've broadened. So one of the things that is to our brand and culture, one of our kind of important missions is we're big believers in broadening the definition of innovation, in the sense that innovation is oftentimes just synonymous with technology, and that's very limiting. And
Did you put yourselves in that category?
We always went back and forth on that. What are we? Are we a tech company? Are we just a couple of guys that don't know what they're doing? Probably the latter. Are we media? Are we tech? Are they one and the same these days? Ultimately, I think the differentiation over the last 5 years between new media and old media and digital media, it's all just going to be media, and I think we are a media company for sure. And media companies now in the digital age have to be technology driven, but we are a media company. We bring an audience together with advertisers. That's a media model. Facebook is the most dangerous media company on the planet. They own display advertising with Google, So we produce content, and that's a differentiator in how people like to define a consumer tech company to a media company. But I think there's a lot of gray area there. And we broadened on innovation in the sense that innovation is really kind of just change for the better. And when we thought about the original goal of how do we bring more attention to the good things that people are doing here, it wasn't just let's get everybody in tech in Boston to read and talk about tech in Boston. We wanted to make tech in Boston interesting to those people that maybe work in finance. We want to make it interesting to, people that are on the periphery, in traditional marketing, in government, whatever it is. In Silicon Valley and San Francisco, tech to them is like the Sox, the C's, the B's, and the Pat Stas. They're fervent about it. We're probably never going to be that way. That's sports. That's not going to change here. But if we could move the needle at all in making that interesting and touching on innovation within kind of those verticals, because technology touches everything, that was kind of our creed of how do we do that. So our publication in DC is heavy into the innovation angle with regards to what have digital technologies done to affect fundraising, advocacy, campaigning, what have you. So we have expanded out, and we really have two sections of our audience. We have, and we define ourselves internally as our audience is the innovation class, and what we mean by that is current and future business leaders, which all of our business coverage applies to them. Cultural influencers. A lot of the people that we cover that are doing interesting, innovative things, like the person who started her own yoga studio and is now promoting it on YouTube. The chef who is putting QR codes literally in your meal and things like that. We bucket them as cultural influencers, and then just working professionals. That bell curve, 25 to 39. What do I want to do with my career? How do we reach them? The best places to go to brunch is usually what gets them every time. And we do right that. So when you think about like the innovation community in a city, it's not just about work all the time, but how do you make the city the best for people to work, live, and play? And that's kind of how we think about our editorial. Here definitely touches sports. And sports is our least trafficked section and probably our best writers. We've been at it like not that long, so it's new, but it's not core to us. But
you get serious competition on sports, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's the most crowded. That's the most crowded media space in Boston. We've got a kid who's been doing a syndicated talk radio show since he was like 12, and he's killer. He wrote a great piece about Dan Shaughnessy that you guys should all read if you don't like Dan Shaughnessy. But we're one of our angles in sports is very much the innovation of sports where nobody else is playing. And I think from a startup standpoint, we really do have this kind of like sports startup innovation cluster that's developing here. We've got DraftKings, which is in the sports space that, I think their last round was like 24 million or something. They've got to be north of $1 million valuation on the next one, 100 million. FanCred just signed Liverpool. We've got a bunch of interesting sports stuff. Coach Up is a really interesting company. So we've always had this like dream of somehow integrating startups with the sports communities, because if there's anything that could get startup fervor in Boston distribution across the globe, it would be Red Sox Nation. If the Red Sox picked a startup of the week or something, that'd be so great. We're not there yet, but so we think about kind of how do we intertwine innovation. Boston has always been seen as kind of a siloed city in a lot of different ways. So a lot of our events are designed to try and break down those barriers and bring people together. So like our 50 on Fire event, we have the top people that run yoga studios who are much better dancers, as we found out from the last event, than the technology people that run the event. And it's fun. People love it. It's not the same people that you see and work with every day. So it's not easy, but that's kind of our mission to bring a lot of it.
How much is the entry to go to an event for people?
Depends on the event. Some are free and some cost $100. So there's a range.
So I want to pick up on a couple things. I mean, so one is we're talking about innovation, and it's sort of like a gray area for you guys, right? You're actually asking yourselves, or do we fit in this innovation category or not? The other one is scale, right? So digital, we typically think of as, digital is almost infinitely scalable. Mm-hmm. Experiential, which was the other thing you say you try to deliver to your clients, certainly not infinitely scalable, and oftentimes not scalable at all.
Right.
It's physical, it's customized, it's all that. And yet you guys brought on equity capital, which we usually think of as going with, innovative, scalable businesses that are attacking huge markets, right? Mm-hmm. So can you pick up the story there? Mm-hmm. You raise venture capital, and you ultimately sell the company to American City, so the business journals, basically.
Yep.
So can you kind of just pick up the story there with the VC round and kind of walk it through?
So on the VC front, I mean, the hardest challenge in raising the capital was within the media space. We're certainly innovative in the sense that, Boston.com, which is the largest news source in Boston, the Globe has a 300-something person newsroom, and they do about 5 million uniques a month. We do half that with 10 people. So when you think about scale, we scale well digitally, but when people talk about digital, especially Boston venture capitalists, and I really don't blame them. I would probably think the same way if I had invested in the companies that they had. The headcount issue for a media company is scary. I was asked 1 million times, can you do San Diego or Chicago without hiring anyone there? Categorically, no, I cannot. You cannot cover a community without being in it. Doesn't work. So the headcount on the content production side is not something that VCs in this town are comfortable with. I had a lot of guys that wanted to get comfortable with it, and I was lucky to get the seed round from the people that I did. And if we had probably been 2 years later, it would have been a lot easier. You've got Vox Media down in D.C., which is backed by Excel, and a bunch of West Coast guys. They run The Verge, they run SB Nation, they just bought the Curbed network. I think they're the best in the business at digital publishing scale, and they've probably raised about $50 million. You had Huffington Post, who, even those guys, they were acquired for 300-something mil, and I think if they had been 2 years later, that price tag would have been higher. Let's see, Bleacher Report raised 45 mil, so there are models of how this is working. We didn't get to that, the deals that I was looking at on the second follow-on round were tough, but the digital scale part, if you're not familiar with media and the value of the original content production, is a hard thing to get your mind around if you're used to, enterprise software company that hires 20 developers and you can sell it to people anywhere. So that replicable model of I need to hire people in all of these cities, I had a number of people say, you're an HR company. And at the time, I was like, I'm a media company. I mean, I am an HR company. I have 20-somethings in multiple cities that, you have to train, you have to convince them not to do dumb stuff at holiday parties. You need to do all sorts of things. And that's tough when I'm doing dumb stuff at holiday parties. So it's a human capital intensive business, but we got a group in Philadelphia to buy into it, and they were close to Comcast, Spectacor, which helped. They believed in media disruption. The guys at Atlas were huge. Ryan Moore believed in media disruption, and he's probably one of the most media-oriented guys in Boston. So we were able to put that together, and then we were constantly trying to figure out right and wrong to a degree. We were so focused on keeping headcount small, which doing that for the right reasons is right, and I don't know if we always did that. But there are times, especially on the sales side, that part of the reason Vox Media is so strong is that as much technology there is behind advertising and big display advertising, advertising is very much the traditional infrastructure around who actually buys ads, the media buyers at agencies who still control massive amounts of budget. It's a relationships business. So being purely technically driven is not going to get it there. So they've done a great job, and part of the reason they're so strong is they've just got probably the best digital ad sales team.
You guys didn't have any actual person selling. It was just
You're looking at him. I was the guy, yeah. And now we've got a bunch.
But you were meeting with the agencies in here and all the big agencies.
So the trouble with agencies is, there's a point of scale where that you have to get to. And, if I'm JetBlue,
I wouldn't answer that.
Question from line. Yeah. Is that JetBlue?
Yeah.
Which one is it? To hang up.
There we go. If I'm JetBlue, my media buying is millions and millions. So small upstart, it's tough to get into agency buys. And the agency world is it's a whole. You're talking to 23-year-old media buyers who really don't know that much about digital media, and you have to buy them lunch and all sorts of stuff. So we would go direct to client, and that's how we started. And we're just now at a point where we're actually in the formal RFP process where they send out RFPs, and we're starting to get dollars that way. So it takes a while to build that up. Even when you look at Facebook, who does a tremendous amount of money, one of the things they say on their earnings calls is it's never really been a focus to develop the ad relationships, and they don't have to because they've got the most valuable audience on the planet, probably. But even they view their businesses like not as developed on the ad sales side as they think they can be. So, us, Facebook.
So what about American City? How did that all come about? Why was it the right time to do that deal?
So we were, it was April 2012, opening day of Red Sox season. And I have a friend here in Boston, a guy named Brian McBride, who used to work for the NHL. And he'd started a company that had some investment from ACBJ. And American City is a division of the company that owns Condé Nast, Reddit. They're the largest shareholders in the Discovery Channel. They're one of the big tenants of the Freedom Tower in New York City, so it's a very big media company. And I had heard that he was meeting with the CEO, and I said, I hear you've got a board meeting. What are you doing after? I said, we're going to the Red Sox game. How would you feel if I conveniently showed up right at the end of your meeting and just a little introduction? I said, yeah, sure. So they ended up giving me a ticket to the game. I got to know the guy, and we were out raising an A round, and of all those conversations that I kept having with certain VCs where they were asking me, how do you do it without people? I would love to lie to you to get your money, but I can't do it without people. That's not, I would be lying to you if I told you that. So we were having a hard time there, and first conversation that I had with their CEO, with Shaw, he said, you got to hire people. It's a people business. You got to get that. We have 40 publications in 40 markets, and I get it. It's a people business. So he and I hit it off, and I told him in April, I said, I really got to get a deal done by Memorial Day. And the lesson learned there was I didn't say Memorial Day of what year. And I lost all leverage when still in June and July I was hanging around. So it took a long time, much longer, to get the deal done than I had hoped. But I was balancing the A rounds, which from a price standpoint we weren't happy with, and their deal, which kept getting better and better as the A round pricing wasn't where we wanted it. And we went up to New York and met with their head of M&A, who used to be the head of M&A for Yahoo. So he had a little bit more deal experience than me. This being my first acquisition, and he was a pretty good guy, very sharp guy, and everything started to fall in line. And they had grand visions of we want to take this to multiple cities. This is the model for saving local journalism. One thing led to another. November 15th, real close to Memorial Day, the deal went through. So that was a long summer. It was a very long summer.
Took the entire baseball season.
Yeah.
From start to finish.
Considering the asymmetric nature of that negotiation, did you feel like you had the appropriate resources behind you to sort of not level the playing field, but at least make it reasonable?
That's a good question. So, really, the only thing that the good thing was that I really did have offers for an A round, so I didn't have to lie and say I had offers when I didn't. So that was the saving grace that I had. And I'm not. I was never one of. You hear these stories about people who raise rounds. Well, I told him I had a term sheet when I didn't. I've never been able to do that because I don't know. I don't think I have a good poker face. So I learned a lot about literally every deal point that I didn't even think about. And what I think that they know the minutia of this so much better than I did. That I think the biggest thing that we had in our favor was I think they thought I would have crumbled by July and just been like, all right, whatever you guys want. And I think they were pretty sick of me by the time that I was like Rocky in the first one, both eyes just standing there. This fucking guy's still here? Are you kidding me? And he's arguing? Really? So I think that's really what had it, because I'm a line item. They're so big that I think if I had been the only deal, they could have really worked me over. But,
and were you relying on additional capital from your insiders, or were you guys cash flow positive? I mean, what was the story there?
No, I mean we were.
Because it sounds like the timeline was a lot longer than you.
Yeah, it was a tightrope walk. So the best part of the deal, and I'm legally not allowed to talk about any financial stuff after the after the day of the acquisition. But I mean, we had never missed a payroll, and it was so close. We got the deal done and made it. So we went to the Hong Kong and Boston and partied that. Real classy after an acquisition. Yeah.
So now that you're owned by American Cities, you kind of chat a little bit about your motivation when you first started out, trying to connect the Boston tech community, make us a little bit louder, kind of be like a hard tech bunch for businesses. So now that you're owned by this large corporation that has business journals in 40 different cities, etc., have you noticed that the culture, your motivation, kind of has things changed at all, or is it more motivated?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually better than before. I mean, the amount of my mind share prior to the acquisition that went towards keeping the lights on and fundraising was significant. And I don't have to think about that now. Or at least they've told me I don't have to think about that. They're still funding this. Which is great. I mean, I didn't write. I like to write. I hadn't written since we raised the seed round, really. And now we do a daily. I do a daily newsletter with one other guy, which I never would have had the time to do that. So I actually think that it's enabled us to really focus just on the business, which is cool. And we have very much gotten back to my energy being on that definition of innovation and what we stand for, which between April and November 15th, I mean, I talked to no one, man. I was laser focused on getting our deal done. So we had a few things that had kind of gone off path for what I think where we want to get to, and we're now back on that. Everything from hiring, cultural fit, who we want on the team, what our brand and content stands for, how our sales process should go, all that stuff, which had been neglected. I get to focus on 100% now, which is the fun stuff. I'm a bit of a masochist, and I like that, chasing the purple dragon of getting the money and getting the deal done, but it's really not that valuable, except for just the capital to keep the lights on. What really builds a business is all the other stuff. So, it's better in that sense, and it's been good in terms of, we really think about our business in 3 phases. There was the pre-seed, which was a couple of people trying to rub 2 sticks together and see if we could start something, and it was chasing any, it was essentially lean development for media, where every single article, it was, did it resonate with an audience, and if so, was it the title, was it the opening, was it the tone, was it, whatever it was. I keep hanging up on this person, I feel bad. I don't know what it is. But I have this phone in my office, there's no way to silence it, so you just gotta hang up. So we had that, and then there was the seed team, which was, pick your key metric and ramp, and how much can we ramp it to try and get to that next stage of capital. And now we're truly building a well-rounded media business, which is the right way to be doing it. A lot of things about media don't fit the venture capital model particularly well, because a consumer website like Instagram or something like that you can scale very quickly with the product, but one thing about journalism that doesn't scale overnight is trust and brand. And the VCs, because they have to, it's their business, scale, do whatever you can. So there's like this tension with parts of a really good editorial product and what you have to do for venture metrics that it didn't hugely affect us, but you see it with like it was more Bleacher Report than us that you could see it where they write anything that you think you can get in Google search results, and not to knock those guys, they've got some really great editorial people now, and I think it's a really good product, but there's definitely a tension in the media business on that stuff for sure. So now it's a very well-rounded business, and we get to focus.
Do you work kind of with the same people, though? I know it's well-rounded, but like, has the cost increased a lot?
Cost?
I mean, like a headcount people like that.
So we went from, we were at like 12 to 15 seed, and now we're at like 45. So we really don't want to hit that 50 mark for healthcare stuff, but we'll probably cross it in this coming year.
Can you talk about?
Not with you, man.
Can you talk about the Angelus Syndicate dinner and whether or not you had to wear a hood on your head to go to it?
It's a great question. No hoods. I just chose to do that. No. The Angelus Syndicate dinner. The Atlas guys are.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah. Okay. The Atlas guys are playing a different game.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're ahead of the curve. So I'll give you the gory details on that later.
So the question was asked, has American City changed you guys? What about the other way around?
So probably the most stress that's imparted on our company from the deal is that they really want to learn from us. So, we have visitors from all over Advance that come and observe for a day. That's like having a house guest,
Yeah,
You don't just leave them there. Do you need something to drink?
Take them to the Hong Kong afterwards.
Take them to the
like
con,
that.
see if they can hang. Which is great because, we very much think we can learn just as much as them from them as they can from us. So, they own NJ.com, they own NOLA.com, they own some of the biggest dailies, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, they own the big dailies in Oregon. They've got some people with real news chops across a lot of different publications, and our young, inexperienced people have a lot to learn from them, and they, from distribution on Facebook and how to think about distribution and how to think about headlines for digital versus what a print headline would look like. There's a lot of good stuff to learn, but that, it also requires time to then do these things. So it's a beneficial thing, especially for the long run, but it's definitely something that when you think about startups and how everybody says you should put the blinders on and never do anything that doesn't immediately affect your company tomorrow and push your results and all that. That's, it's something that's not natural to running a startup, and we are still very much a startup. 40-something people. It's not that big of a company. So.
And the traffic, how's it right now?
It's good. We've gone from a place in the company where, and I think you're going to start to see a lot of publishing businesses move this way, is we're no longer like, whatever we can do to get that next million uniques, we're going to do it. We've started to align. I would much rather have 100,000 uniques within the greater Boston DMA than 500,000 from other areas. And we get a lot of traffic from New York, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and LA, and we're starting to get some from Chicago. And it's not to say that traffic isn't valuable, but for a lot of our local clientele, it's not particularly valuable. And as we start to sell into bigger brands that want to get into these other hubs, it plays. So we don't want to discourage it, but and we're putting a lot of emphasis on how to define the quality of traffic, which I think you're starting to see. Vox has always been. They get a ton of traffic, and compared to a company like ours, but compared to the Huffington Post or Bleacher Report, they've always prided themselves on quality and doing a little bit less compared to Let's get every unique under the sun. So we've changed how we think about traffic, and ultimately we've thought about audience from a business standpoint. You know, is this an audience that some segment of our advertisers and marketers ultimately want to reach? Which in the early days it was like, fuck, let's get as many uniques as we can. So that's how we've been affected from a traffic standpoint, which is a good thing. It's bottom line thinking, which is what a business is supposed to do. So, and then they take accounting very seriously. So that's been something that we've changed. Yeah, they were not cool with how I was doing it in QuickBooks. It's all the normal things that when a big formal company acquires a startup, and they've been very good about easing us into this stuff. They have lawyers look over leases when you sign an office space, which that was always too expensive. So there's a lot of good stuff that comes from it's, I think, traditionally labeled as bureaucracy. But it's great to have a lawyer look at
all the G&A functions that you picked up, huh?
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. So
I like that. Could we talk a little bit more about your pre-seed round?
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you kind of asked for just as much as you needed to kind of keep things rolling, but you didn't. What was your decision to do that as opposed to ask for, all right, we want X dollars, which is going to keep us going for 6 more months? When you made that decision, how did you do that?
In terms of, we're just going to kind of go endlessly at this?
Yeah, were you worried about the
I didn't think I was employable.
Okay.
What else am I got? I got to make this work. Who would hire me? No, I think we were lucky to be delusional enough that we thought it was just confidence, and we didn't listen to the people that said it couldn't happen. I think we got lucky that there were certain guys that were advisors and that knew we were doing certain things wrong, and they knew we were too naive to flat out listen to that's not going to work, and they finessed it into a way that our young arrogance could listen to. But we never once, there were a lot of breaking moments where we were like, shit, this isn't going to work. But there was never all right, we'll quit. It was just kind of, do we have to do it differently? I don't know. I think I'm not that smart. I'll keep banging my head on the wall. So my co-founder is the brains and I'm the mouth. That's kind of the joke. So we had taken money from people too, and it was the biggest thing was the pressure was like the worst thing that could happen is not getting a return on these people's money. It wasn't a ton of money, but it felt like it to us. So,
and they're close to you, so the relationship is more important as well. Right?
Yep. And we got them a good return. So never again will we take that money. That's too much. Family and friends, they were great. It's not them. It's just like they're not professionals.
Right.
You feel less badly about professional money.
Yeah. Probably
not, but a tiny bit.
It's a little less awkward around the Christmas dinner table.
There you go. That is for sure. So,
what other questions you guys have?
When seeking out your seed found round, did you specifically look for those with media experience that could help you not only just with the fund and the capital side, but also with their experience?
Yeah. So we were lucky that between our advisory, on our advisory board, we had a really well-rounded group of people. We had Walt Doyle, who was the CEO of Ware, which he sold to PayPal, who had some media background. We had a guy named Mike Troiano, who's now the CMO of Actifio. He had worked on a number of different startups. He had started a company that the Kraft family had backed. Just a very, very sharp guy. Emily Green, who is now the CEO of Smart Lunches. She had worked at the Yankee Group. And from kind of a network standpoint, she really helped convince people that we were legit and not just a bunch of kids, which I don't know if I would have done that. Gus Weber, who was at Polaris, and Kathy Kiley, who was the president of the ad club. So we had the advertising community, we had a venture capitalist, we had a CEO, we had a branding guy. We had kind of a good balance. And then, we hounded people at HuffPo. We hounded a lot of the people in the industry that we thought were doing it right. And we got a lot of informal advice from the CTO of the Huffington Post at the time, a guy named Paul Berry, who is now working on a number of different startups, one of the smartest guys that we had met from a technical standpoint. So we were lucky to surround ourselves with a lot of people that had been there and done it across, I think, different functions and areas of our business that were really important. And we sought out as many people as we could that we thought that was probably the best thing that we did. We did get a lot of people smarter than us to kind of help us along the way.
So you recommend casting a wide net as far as the mentorship side?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing about mentorship is that, and we did a pretty good job because a lot of people warned me of it, but like making it structured where we tried to give one thing to each of them, because like informal mentorship, you can spin your wheels for 2 hours and walk out of there thinking that guy's really smart, but I don't have one takeaway to improve my business. And so, with Mike just worked on our branding and positioning. CMO, he worked at a agency at the time, and that was like the one thing we asked him. Walt was purely from a CEO standpoint. He coached me a lot and told me about all the mistakes I was making and how to get through them. And he still does that, which I owe him for. Kathy was our liaison into the advertising community as the president of the ad club, which was huge. And we kind of had these very defined takeaways for each of them, which they were also grateful for because, they had stock in the company and they wanted to help. But, it's not their business, so tell me how I can help, and we gave them one thing. So if you're going to do it, I would, from the get-go, too, it's like, here's the one thing that I need for you. Do you think you can help? If so, happy to give you some skin in the game, and that's what we did. And it worked out pretty well for everybody. They made some money off of it, which is good.
Could you, and then this might be an inappropriate question, can you tell me what type of skin in the game you're offering to these people?
Yeah, I mean, typically, depending on the advisor and the level, I think what's in the earliest stages, what I think is industry standard is really, it depends on who it is and how much time you're asking for, but it can be anywhere from 1/10 of a point to 1/2 a point if it's going to be hands-on every week, and we applied the same vesting as it, to the options as it would be for an employee. And, we had a formal at the end of every year after it. We'll sit down, review with you, are you still getting the value out of this? Are we still? So we formalized it, which is always a difficult thing to do because usually advisors come on board because they like you and there's kind of a friendship. But we just got that conversation out of the way up front. All right, let's talk about business and how this works because, I don't want you in something for 4 years if you don't want to be spending time with me, and vice versa. I have to do this for the company. I can't just... Equity is important. I can't give it away if we're not going to get something tangible out of it. And all the good advisors and all of ours were good. Absolutely. It was business. So that's kind of how we do it.
What other questions?
I don't want to...
Go ahead.
So, did you consider convertible notes in your initial rounds?
We
Something
did.
that I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
so.
we did a price round. The way that I guess where I've gotten
You did
to,
a price round both times, including friends and family?
No, that actually, and I wouldn't recommend this. We didn't do it right with those people. They ended up being a convertible note. And they ended up getting the right deal. But I would, if you're going to do that, I would paper that note at the time. We had a very loose setup. And luckily, the people that we're dealing with have been in private equity and startups, so it would have been hairy if they were less sophisticated, but they weren't, so that was good. But kind of at the stage where a company is, like depending how early you are, like if you're looking for capital, I'm not big into convertible notes on like traditional seed rounds, anywhere from $500,000 to like $2 million. I tend to lean, it's more, I find it's better for the entrepreneur to do price rounds often. And right now you can get a pretty good price. But if you're talking about like the earliest, you need like $50,000 for a prototype or something like that.
That's more what I'm talking about.
Convertible probably makes sense. And I do some diligence on like AngelList in terms of looking at what do you think the market is for the seed and making sure that getting the temperature of after the seed and where do they need to land, 2-4%. Some, if it's a seed fund, they're probably looking more like 6 to 8, and hopefully you can convince them that it's going to be 6 to 8% is probably like if you're a seed fund anywhere from 10 to 20 million, they probably want to land there, and convince them it's going to be so big that 5 will do.
How much time during that time you're waiting into November? How much time do you commit, like on a weekly basis, to pursuing
the deal?
That deal, yeah.
I mean, the worst part about that is that there's really nothing you can do because they say, I'll call you back. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to come off like super needy.
Yeah.
So I just called literally everybody else that couldn't do anything for the deal. What do you think's going on over there? Like, I don't know, man. Like, try and go do something else. I didn't sleep a lot in November. I actually, there are not many people on the planet that could do it, but I lived all those years. I'm engaged now, so I don't anymore, but I lived with my co-founder. So, I mean, we were around each other all the time. He likes to tell the story of he came back one day and I was just like lying on the couch with like pizza around. He's like, what are you doing? You don't look well. I haven't got a call back for like 48 hours on the deal. I think they're bailing. He's like, they're definitely not bailing. So, I didn't do that like life balance thing well, which next time I think I'm going to be a little bit better on it, but it was all the deal. I tried desperately to, I'd show up to meetings, content meetings, sales meetings. I was like, I probably shouldn't even be here. I'm not bringing like a positive energy. So, luckily I had a bunch of other guys. If anybody knows Greg Gomer, you do. That guy is just the most positive guy there is. So, he handled the positive front to a lot of our employees.
So what does next time look like?
Oh man, a lot smarter. I don't think media? No. Probably it would be something in the vein of mobile, social aspects. We kick around ideas all the time. So, not to tease anything, but we're always kicking it around. But I'm a big believer in the mobile ad space, and not from an infrastructure-heavy technology standpoint, but consumer application. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that will happen in mobile, where you could build big ad businesses, for sure. Eventually, we will do. Who knows? Maybe someday I'd buy back Streetwise. Snowball's chance of that.
And when you look outside your company to what's going on out there, and you see Twitter as the big news feed, what's your reaction? What do you think? What's your concept? How does that fit into where you are? A lot of people feel in the profession that Twitter is the real thing.
Yeah, I mean the way
not that there's not going to be 10 Twitters,
right?
But right now,
The way that we think about it is we use the term around the office a lot that Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn to a degree, Google News to a degree, or the new paper boys. I mean, they are your distribution. And the hardest thing about the content business is you have to play ball with these guys because they are the conduits to audience and growth. But if you hitch your wagon too much to any one of them, you've seen it with Facebook newsfeed algorithm change. You've seen it with a Google algorithm change. It can significantly affect your business. So our kind of decision on all of it is, we want to try and spread the eggs equally across the distribution baskets and be as smart as possible. We want to get as much audience as we can, but ultimately we want to own the user, which is a difficult thing to do. But if we can get your email and you're willing to let us into your inbox every day, that's something for the most part that shouldn't change too much. Google is now adding filters into Gmail, which can be a little dangerous. But ultimately, if people want you to send it directly to them, that's I think the best thing. That's like getting the newspaper on your doorstep. So you're gonna see a lot of stuff that we're doing this year is around content lockers for some of our content that we think our most loyal audience wants. We're going to ask in return for a registration. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff like that. So we want to as much as possible, and it's a sign of value. If people want to give you their information and they're willing to do that, part with their data, that means we're providing value. So everything that we do, ultimately, if we can drive it back to that registration, that's our key audience benchmark now, which a lot of people still think about UVs and PVs, and page views and impressions is how the ad business works, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But I think the value, and if we're getting those registered users, the page views will come. And we're not fully at selling 100% of our inventory anyway, so when we start selling 100% of our inventory, which very few publishers are doing, then I'll worry about that. But I agree. I mean, and the difficulty is it's scary. I have a lot of data that can tell you that some of our most successful articles on Twitter and on Facebook, the people actually don't click through and read the article. They look at the headline and then they just talk about it. So, and then that brings into, you have to write some artful titles that you have to click through to find out what you're talking about, but then you're kind of baiting people, so it's a very difficult game. But it's scary how we had an article the other day that had like 1,000 likes on Facebook, and everybody was, some of the people that read was like, oh, that article really blew up. Well, kinda. Half of those people didn't read the article. So, and then we have one that has 50 likes and way more people read the article. So, I think the biggest challenge that online publishers are facing is like how do you truly, what's the value metric? Circulation was pretty straightforward. People paid you for that content. That's not how it goes anymore. So we've actually created our own. We call it the Flame Score. We've created our own metric that is a combination. It's a weighted average of different metrics. So Facebook likes, tweets, LinkedIn shares, a comment on an article, a page view, a unique visitor, and our own proprietary +1 button that users click if they like the article. And we've weighted those 7 metrics to give the writer one Flame Score to gauge how well they're doing, to be a well-rounded writer. Because one of the things that, I'm deep in the data, and even I sometimes am like, should I care about likes, UVs, or comments? Like, it's too much for any one person who's, a writer to think about all of these things. So we rolled it up into one, and their KPI and what they're measured on is Flame Score. We call it Flame Score because there's like a tiny little flame next to it, and that's just what they started calling it. So So.
And what do you think of the future of like the paywalls and like the premium models of content and like or some like part premium and like because they always say like the big brands are the ones who can offer very specific content like Financial Times. They are the economists. They are allowed for people to pay online, but like this community information that is kind of broad. Do you think people will be willing to pay?
Our model right now wouldn't work with a paywall. I'm actually a believer in, I pay for the Wall Street Journal. I'm a believer in their paywall. I think it's always going to be a risk. Like, you saw what The Atlantic did with Quartz, and that was a direct competitor to The Economist. And Quartz is a really good product, I think. So there's always a risk, but I think particularly for journalists that are committed to data, particularly in business, aggregating and making intelligence out of certain data sets is something that I think people will always pay for, and the work that it takes to produce it, it's going to have to be paid for. It's really, really hard to do that on the cheap and do it well. And I think that's where you're starting to see the new model of like data and research driving a paywall, and then news and blogging, which facts very quickly become commoditized online. The second the dentist writes something, I can rewrite that in 5 minutes, and it becomes a commodity, and vice versa. So like, X company raised $15 million is such a boring article because everybody writes that 2 seconds later, and everybody uses the same quotes. So I think the people that do it really well, like GigaOM, what they've done is they have a very differentiated product in their GigaOM research and premium stuff that takes a ton of time, and it takes man hours, and it takes really smart people to do it. And their blogging and their news is essentially their inbound marketing content that gets people to then pay for the heavier stuff. And I like that. I like that model a lot, particularly in business. I think on the consumer side, TMZ and all the lighter fare, if you will, that's got to be ad supported. And luckily, sadly, more people are interested in that.
They made $1 billion today off the Bieber.
So he's addicted to scissor, I learned. Unbelievable. So I think consumer-y stuff is always going to be, it's got to be ad supported, but it warrants a wide enough audience that it can be.
Has anyone ever turned down your request for brunch that you really, really wanted to have brunch with?
Brunch? Yeah, probably plenty of girls in the past. I won't name names.
Let's say business partners.
Business partners turning down meetings. Yeah, I got way more. Raising capital. I had 112 meetings. I got 111 no's. So that wasn't too fun.
Who's counting?
Well, right. And I can't tell you how many people wouldn't meet with me, because that was probably way more than that.
Mm-hmm. The story I heard yesterday, I told you this story, right? The local, somebody who is very successful and has had built a company that is well known, went out to San Francisco. You're going to like to enjoy this. And had a fundraising meeting that was canceled because at the last second, the angel investor realized that he was from Boston and not New York. He assumed he was from New York. When he found out he was from Boston, he canceled the meeting.
Really? Nice. You got names for me?
Yeah, I got plenty of names. I can tell you.
So I guess I'll be reading about that one later. Yeah. Well, I got some strong feelings about people that give a damn about anybody outside the city. I used the analogy earlier today that how many people have you guys seen Braveheart? You know the noblemen that always kowtow to the British. I feel like we have some people there. Silicon Valley covering us. Why don't you care about BostInno? Who cares if they care about BostInno? I would paint my face and go crazy. Sarah Lacey can kiss my ass. So, that's how I feel about it. And you can put that in there.
Okay.
You talked about early on chasing one metric as a startup. What was your metric? Was it page views? Was it
UVs? Unique visitors. How many people? So.
Did you get does that become an obsessive compulsion?
Oof. Talking Gomer about that. we seriously we use the term chasing the purple dragon, which it's a South Park reference for a drug addiction. But Gomer and the UVs, oof. Yeah. And I wasn't as bad as him, but I was close. It was. And then we had this initiation of, if you're a writer, can you drop a hit? And that's something that we have Chartbeat open all day, which is real-time analytics. And the hit would be every day we'd be looking at the traffic, and our last high was 100,000 uniques in one day, and the story starts to gain more and more people on Chartbeat. 800 people, 900 people, starting to pop off was the term. It's popping off, and then any writer that won the day and finally had one that beat our previous high day, take them out to the bar, and it was like, you're initiated. So we've had to tone that down.
All right. Any other questions for Chase? Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I think there's a full-on.